So we have been in the midst of a series called Parables, the spiritual metaphors of Jesus. So with this series, we're going through all of the parables, one by one. Some of them we're going to be going by two, but like I said, we're going to be going through all the parables and extracting the wisdom that comes from them. Again, I think this is important because Jesus taught in parables. Jesus used these parables to explain spiritual concepts to the people that he was talking to. So not only was it beneficial for the people of that day, I believe it's beneficial for us as well if we go through the parables and are able to understand what Jesus was trying to communicate to his audience then as well as to his audience today. So this week we're going to go over two parables again. We're going to go over these parables are related. So we're going to go over the parables of the Dragnet and the parable of the wheat and tares. You may be familiar with the wheat and tares parable, but you may not be familiar with the Dragnet parable. But like I said, these are interconnected. Okay? Now, like I said, each week we're going to read the parable. We're going to give the cultural background on the parable. We're going to explain the meaning of the parable in its cultural context. And then we're going to learn how to apply the parable. And again, we'll continue this pattern every week as we go through each parable. Now, today, like I said, we have two parables, so we're going to go through these back to back. We'll get the cultural context, and then we'll go through all of the parables, both parables together, to get the meaning from them. Amen? So let's start with our first parable, the parable of the Dragnet. Where this is in Matthew 13, 47 through 50. So it reads, "Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a dragnet that was cast into the sea and gathered fish of every kind. And when it was filled, they pulled it up on the beach, and they sat down and gathered the good fish into containers, but the bad they threw away. So it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come forth and remove the wicked from among the righteous, and they will throw them into the furnace of fire. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." Now, again, to reiterate, I talked about how when Jesus taught in parables, he always used metaphors that the people could, at that time, would be familiar with. So, in this parable, Jesus used fishing as the backdrop for the metaphor. This, again, would be something they were very familiar with. For those of us that went through Bible study, we know I showed you guys a map of ancient Israel at that time. And remember Jesus' base was in Capernaum, right? What was Capernaum? See if you guys remember.
What, you mean like what did they do there?
Yes.
Fishing.
It was a fishing town, right? See? So Capernaum was a fishing town that was on the Sea of Galilee. So again, I'm just using this as an example. So there was a fishing industry there because you had that big sea right there. So again, this would be something that the Jews at that time would have been very familiar with. All right? So here Jesus talks about a specific kind of fishing. And it is the kind of fishing that they did back then. And the type of fishing they primarily used a dragnet. So now a dragnet, for those of y'all that don't understand, just to give you a visual, this is a modern version, but you'll get the visual. All right, so a dragnet had floats at the top, and it had weights at the bottom. So they would throw the net out, and the net would be like a wall. The weights the floats would make the net float at the top. The bottom, the weights would drag it down, so it would create a big wall, and they would drag the net. Nowadays we use boats. Back then they would do it by hand, or they may had taken one of their boats out to do it. We see this with some of the disciples, Peter, James, and Andrew. So they were fishermen. So they would cast this net. It would create a wall, and you would drag it back towards you, and as it dragged, whatever fish were in front of it would get caught up in the net. Now the net was indiscriminate, meaning whatever was in front of it, it would take in. So you would pull the dragnet in, put the dragnet back in the boat, and then once the dragnet was in the boat, you had to go through the fish that you caught. Some fish were edible, well, especially for Jews at that time because of the law. They had certain regulations with the type of fish they could eat. For example, they couldn't do catfish, so Jews couldn't live down south. But they couldn't do fish without scales, shellfish, stuff like that. So they would have to go through and pick out the good fish from the bad fish from their perspective. So again, this is more of a modern day, but I wanted you guys to see how the net works. So we see the net, we see the fish going in. Fish can't swim in reverse, so once they were in, they were just stuck. They would bring the net in. All right, everybody follow me? All right, so that is the parable of the dragnet, and I'll come back to this when we get the meaning of both of them. Now let's move on to the parable of the wheat and tares. All right, so now that's Matthew 13, 24 through 30. And it reads, Jesus presented another parable to them, saying, the kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while his men were sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and left. And when the wheat sprouted and produced grain, then the weeds also became evident. And the slaves of the landowner came and said to him, Sir, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have weeds? And he said to them, An enemy has done this. The slave said to him, Do you want us then to go and gather them up? Talking about the weeds. But he said, No. While you are gathering up the weeds, you may uproot the wheat with them. Allow both to grow together until the harvest. And at the time of the harvest, I will say to the reapers, First gather up the weeds and bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn. All right? So that is the parable of the wheat and tares. So here too again, Jesus goes back to a farming analogy. We know that, again, the past couple of weeks, we know that the Jews also did a lot of farming. So they they grew stuff like figs, pomegranates, olives. They also had sheep and goats that they would herd. So they would be very familiar with farming, and you see Jesus using these analogies a lot. They also would have been very familiar with, because they produce crops, very familiar with the idea of planting seed and planting good seed. Okay, also familiar with weeds and different things, the implications of having those in your crops. So now, when we talk about wheat and tares, it's important to get the visual and understand, why this was so significant. So let's take a look. Someone tell me, which one is wheat and which one is tares?
Wheat is on the left.
Wheat is on the left? So you say wheat is here, and you say tares is here.
Yeah.
Everybody agree? Who says it's the opposite? Okay, let me do it this way. For this side over here, how many say this is? And you can do this too in the chat. How many people say this is wheat? Raise your hand. Okay, I got 2. How many people believe this is a tare? A weed. All right, I have some non-committals. Is this wheat? Do you think this is wheat or a tare? If it's a wheat, raise your hand. If it's a tare, a weed, raise your hand. Okay, Cindy, you can't vote for both. She like. This is a wheat?
No.
A weed. Okay. A tare. Okay. How many people think this is wheat? How many people think this is a tare? How many people think this is confusing and I don't know what the heck it is? All right.
I think they're both the same.
So, this is actually tares or weeds. This is actually wheat. Well, remember, because this is not wheat. This is, you don't eat this. This is the wheat. This, this is what they were growing. This was the good seed. This is what the enemy sowed. So when everything sprouted up, these two were growing together. So they wanted to pull the weeds, but number one, it becomes difficult to distinguish between the two. Number two, or especially this is, let me preface, this is immature wheat and tares. So these aren't ripe yet, okay? But when you go to pull the weeds, you could damage the wheat. So again, in this parable, they're saying let them grow together. But I'll get to that in a minute. Let me get there to a minute. Now, when the wheat matures, the difference becomes very distinguishable. So now, the tares and the wheats have become ripe. When wheat becomes ripe, it bends over because of the weight of the grain kernels. Tares don't. They stay upright. So when they have matured, it becomes easier to identify the wheat from the tare. Everybody with me? Does this begin to make the parable make a lot more sense? All right. So once the wheat ripened, it would become harvested. Okay? They would harvest it. So they would cut the stalks, and then they would either beat the wheat on the ground to get the kernels out, or they could sometimes use oxen to trample again to get the kernels out. This is the stuff they're actually looking for. So then they would do what's called winnow. Basically, you smash everything. Everything's on the ground. They have what's called a winnowing fork. They take the fork, they toss everything up in the air. The wind blows the junk, basically. Thank you. And then the wheat falls to the ground because it's heavier. So that's how you separate the wheat from the chaff. The chaff, the straw, all that stuff gets disposed of. They may make, I'm assuming they make hay out of it, but anyway, it gets disposed of, and you get the wheat. So that's how you end up separating the wheat from the tares. All right, going through that whole process. All right, so now let's go through the elements of each of these parables. All right. Now, with this particular parable, the one with the wheat and the tares, Jesus did tell his disciples the meaning of the parable and what each element within the parable meant. Okay, so we're going to go back to Matthew, and for this particular parable, we're going to see what Jesus identified each element to mean within this parable. Amen? Let's go back to Matthew 13, 36 through 43. Now, then he left the crowd, talking about Jesus, and went into the house. And his disciples came to him and said, "Explain to us the parable of the weeds of the field." And he said, "The one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man." Talking about Jesus. Okay? 37. And he said, the one who sows it is the seed of man. 38. And the field is the world. And as for the good seed, these are the sons of the kingdom, meaning believers. Okay? And the weeds are the sons of the evil one, essentially those that are unsaved. And the enemy who sowed them is the devil. And the harvest is the end of the age. All right? That's basically Jesus talking about the final judgment. Verse 40. Oh, the harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are the angels. Okay, then verse 40. So just as the weeds are gathered up and burned with fire, so shall it be at the end of the age. Verse 41. The Son of Man will send forth his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all stumbling blocks and those who commit lawlessness, and they will throw them into the furnace of fire. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine forth like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. The one who has ears, let him hear. All right. So again, we see all the elements. Jesus explained the sower, the Son of Man, that's Jesus. The enemy, or the sower of the bad seed, is the devil or Satan. The good seed, the wheat, those are the believers. The bad seed, or the weeds, those are the unbelievers. The field represents the world. All right, so all the seed was planted into the world. The ones doing the harvesting are the angels. Okay, so now when Jesus talks about the good seed is basically the gospel. All right. Now, the wheat that is gathered represents all of the believers that are genuine followers of Jesus Christ. And of course, the tares represent those that don't follow Jesus. The furnace, of course, represents hell. So, the end of the age, they will separate believers from unbelievers. And the unbelievers will be thrown into the furnace. So now, before we move on, I'm going to tackle on the next parable with this. So the parable of the Dragnet is very, very similar. Now we've moved to the interactive portion of our message. So let's go back to the parable of the Dragnet and see if you all can guess the elements in that one. All right. So let me go back there. All right. Parable of the Dragnet. So now this is, aside from this was not farming, this time it was fishing. So what does the dragnet represent? Oh, let me back up. Oh, I forgot. I am at the interactive portion, but I forgot. I have something for this. Y'all will like this. There we go. All right. So this is give you a visual. It's not perfect, y'all. It's not perfect, but cast a net, you see the little floats and weights. You see them catching fish. You got the container here. Okay, let's go. The water. What does the water represent? The world. Very good. The water represents the world. All right, next we have the net. What does a net represent? No. 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 No.
People, places, things.
She got it. The word. It's the gospel. The gospel is a net. The gospel is a net. All right. Next, the fish. What do the fish represent? It's the people. People of all races, creeds, languages, all that stuff. So the gospel goes into the world and it draws people. You got it? All right, let's keep going. Who does this gentleman represent? And again, this is not a perfect picture for this analogy. I'll give it to you because it's not perfect. This would be the angel who separates the fish at the end. All right. So the last one. Oops, too far. Come on, man. It's not working. What does the basket represent? Very good, Sunita.
Where's the basket?
Right here. Yeah.
Yeah, because
The basket. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry.
yeah, now okay.
So the good fish, right? The good fish get put in the basket. Represents the kingdom of heaven. So you see how these parables are very interconnected. Okay. So again, this represent these two parables represent the end times. And again, it talks about a furnace. So the furnace, where's it at? Oh yeah. So it talks about a furnace, and they will throw them into the furnace, where they will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Of course, the furnace represents hell. Now, the meaning of both of these parables are the same. Like I said, these parables represent what will happen at the end times. So like I said, right now the gospel is being presented into the world. Again, this is happening all over the world, all these different countries. Remember I showed you guys, it was a couple of weeks ago, all the different countries where Christianity is growing right now. So the gospel is being presented in those places, and Christians are coming in, right? So the gospel is being shared with all these countries. So it's drawing all different types of people. All different types of people. Now, everybody that comes in does not have the same intentions. All right? People have different reasons for responding to the gospel the way they do. All right? Some people just want relief for their situation. Some people are there out of tradition. My grandma went to church. My mother went to church. I go to church so that I can check God off my list and live like hell Monday through Saturday. Other people come to church in hopes that they can avoid hell, avoid the furnace. Okay. Other people come because they just want to hang out. They want to go where everybody knows their name. They just want fellowship. All right. Then, of course, there are others that legitimately come in response to Jesus Christ and want to grow and get to know him better. Now, this is not anything new. The gospel drawing different types of people has been happening since the church was established in the first century. All right. Let's go to Philippians. Philippians 1, verses 15 through 17. Verse 15. Some, to be sure, are preaching Christ. And let me set this up real quick. At this point, Paul is in prison. Okay? But there's people still going out and preaching the gospel. However, not everybody that's going out and preaching the gospel has the same motive for preaching the gospel. Okay? So different people are preaching the gospel with different motives. Some people are literally doing it because Paul is locked up and they want to continue to further the message. Other people are doing it almost out of spite. So that's the backdrop with what Paul is saying. Here we go. Philippians 1, 15 through 17. Some, to be sure, are preaching Christ even from envy and strife, but some also from goodwill. The latter do it out of love, knowing that I am appointed for the defense of the gospel. The former proclaim Christ out of selfish ambition rather than from pure motives, thinking that they are causing me distress in my imprisonment. So like I said, Paul is basically stating that some people are preaching Christ out of envy and strife, and others are preaching out of goodwill. Now, this is not just those that are preaching. This is also the representative of the congregations. Again, you have some people that come to church for different motives. Some because they genuinely want to grow in Jesus Christ. Others because they just have different motivations, whatever those motivations may be. But now, in church, or even within Christendom, sometimes we can tell when people have off motives, but a lot of times we can't. This is why, if you remember the Judgy series, I talked about we don't, I talked about how God measures the heart, okay? We can't judge someone's heart. We can't say, we don't know what in most instances, we don't know what their motivations are. So we can't determine who is and who isn't going to hell. Like I said, I always cringe when I hear a Christian tell somebody you're going to hell. We don't know. That's not our place to make that call. So this is why Paul said this. Let's go to 1 Corinthians 4:5. Therefore, do not go on passing judgment before the time, but wait until the Lord comes, who will both bring to light the things hidden in the darkness and disclose the motives of human hearts. And then praise will come forth to each person from God. Now remember, just using the wheat and the tares as an example. When those two, when the wheat and the tares were immature, it was difficult to tell them apart, right? But at the end of the process, at the end of the ripening process, it became very evident. The wheat bowed over, the tares were still standing up straight. So it becomes very easy to distinguish between the two. So Paul is saying, we are not at a place right now where we can really determine the wheat from the tares. At the end, when it's time for the judgment, it will be clear. And then the two will be separated. All right? But it is not our place to make that judgment. Jesus is the one that will be doing the judgment at the end. But too many times, I see Christians try to determine who and who is saved, who and who is not going to hell, who is and isn't going to heaven. And the reality is, we just don't know. So now, we can't judge people's hearts. We don't know because, again, the fullness of time has not come about. The judgment has not come about. So it's difficult for us to be able to determine who is and who isn't a believer or an unbeliever. However, what we can do is judge the fruit. Okay? We can definitely judge the fruit. Let's go to Galatians. Galatians 5:22 through 23, and I've gone over this several times. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law. All right? These are the fruits of the Spirit. Now, again, we can't judge people's motivations, but I can say you're not acting loving. You don't seem joyful. You're not patient. You're not being kind right now. That wasn't a good thing that you said or that you did. Your inconsistency is a sign of unfaithfulness. You're not being gentle, and your actions show a lack of self-control. I can say that. I can make those determinations. That's not saying that you're going to hell. That's saying you're deficient in some fruit, and I can see that. You need to work on. You see what I'm saying? So, again, I don't know the work that God will do on someone's heart over the course of their lifespan. But I can examine you at the state that you're in at that moment and say that you're deficient in fruit. Again, I can't determine who and who is not going to hell, right? But I can judge your fruit and say your fruit's off. You know how you need to check your fruit. Okay? Again, these are evaluations. These are not judgment. These are not condemnations. All right? Because again, it's not our job to cast judgment or to condemn. So, one of my biggest issues with the American church, and I've talked about this before, when you look at our brand of Christianity, we are overly focused on how to make money, teaching about demons, saying who's a witch, bragging about our status in the Lord, whether it's through speaking in tongues or we talk about how powerful we are. We're more worried about living comfortably or being blessed. And when I look at the New Testament, when I look at the church being established, when I look at the apostles as they went from town to town evangelizing, I don't see them doing any of that. None of it. So I don't read where the apostles and the evangelists in the New Testament, I don't read where they were worried about somebody's financial prosperity. They say the opposite. I don't see them worrying about demons and witches. They just go about evangelizing. I don't see them bragging about what they have. They stayed humble. Even when they did brag, I think about Paul. It was Paul that said, if I must boast, I will boast in the things that show my weakness, that basically demonstrates Christ is strong. I'm not going to boast. I'm not, I don't see the apostles teaching about how blessed they were. If being blessed is getting beat in every city you go to, getting thrown in jail, you know what I'm saying? All this getting shipwrecked and all this other stuff. So I just don't see, again, when I look at the American church and the New Testament, I don't see any resemblance. But again, when I look at other countries like China, like Indonesia, like Iran, places where Christianity is growing at a fast rate, these are the countries where, do closely resemble. Now, let me say what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that to be a Christian, you always have to be persecuted. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that, some people should run in here and flog us right now so that our Christianity can be real and true. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is Jesus, before his ascension, gave us a command: make disciples. That's our job. Make disciples. And what I don't see enough of is the American church making disciples. And we know this is true because I've talked about the statistics where in the West, in America, Christianity is, people that identify as Christians, that number goes down every single year. And the number of atheists and agnostics goes up every year. When you look at churches, just use this area as an example. What I really see, I don't see new Christians being made per se. I see churches regurgitating and passing around the same people. One minute I'm at this hot church. Then I'm at that hot church. Then I'm at that hot church. Even when I started real life, some people got mad at me for this, but hey, I didn't announce it to everybody. If you already had a church, I didn't announce it to you. Unless you like real close friends of mine or something like that. Because I didn't want it to be said that I built this church on the backs of people that were already in churches. So, I love y'all young people. I really do. I bless God for y'all. I really do. Y'all were not on my bingo card. Okay? But I'm so glad that you're here, because to have the opportunity for people that either don't know God or know little about God, growing those type of people up where they can develop a relationship with God, that's adding to the kingdom, not taking the same people and rehashing them different locations. Now, full disclosure, just because you've been in church 30 years don't mean you know God. So there is some evangelism that can still take place amongst seasoned saints. Amen? But again, my point is, Jesus put us here to make disciples. And sometimes I think in the American church, we are off. We're off topic. We're off course. We preach prosperity. We preach spiritual power, all these other things. Even when I look in the New Testament, I don't see a lot of that the apostles taught. I see them teaching a lot of doctrine. I see them, now if they teach it, they're teaching it to correct stuff that's already been out there. But again, I see them a lot establishing doctrine and trying to show and teach people how to live. Key takeaways. In these parables, Jesus talks about how it will be at the end times. When it is all over, God will separate the believers from the unbelievers. Believers will go with God, and unbelievers will be separated from Him eternally. It is not our job to figure out who is saved or not saved. Focus on developing and growing in your relationship with Jesus Christ so that you will be with Him at the end. Amen? Let's pray.